Thanks very much. Good morning. So I'd like to just talk about some of the concepts that helped frame the project, and then some of the ways in which that helped us better understand how knowledge is implemented in heritage contexts, and the ways in which we might intervene and help knowledge be kind of more accessible and more used in the cultural heritage field. So at the outset of the project, there were various challenges that were recognized, and this started to help us think about how we might kind of deal with this conceptually. And I think that the first one was really that the information is out there, but it's so scattered. There's climate change models and predictions, there's work in planning, there's work in conservation, the different phenomena, fire, flood, all of these different things had their different fields, different journals that they were looking for. And there was an implication for us that relevant knowledge producers came from these different fields, some of whom weren't really thinking about conservation, weren't thinking about heritage as their main issue. So it was quite hard to influence knowledge production directly. There's also the fact that a lot of these things weren't accessible for a number of different reasons, not least paywalls of journals, but also the kind of the way in which people that access knowledge isn't necessarily going straight to academic journals. There's also the fact that the importance of different kinds of knowledge, it varies with different municipalities. There are different kinds of risks, different vulnerabilities of their heritage, and also the roles of the staff. So, you know, a lot of people were expressing the need for these different kinds of knowledge to come together, so then they could all be kind of applied into their context. And also, there was that the fact that we were mindful of that distance between academia and practice. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of work going on there, but there's also that aspect of implementation, which was very important for us to understand. So and taking some of those kind of successful ideas and successful things and making them more connected to what we are doing. So there's this kind of this notion of research kind of unproblematically making its way into practice. And this isn't really anyone's idea of reality, but sometimes that's the implicit assumption that takes place, that creating knowledge is enough, that kind of publishing the work is enough. But even in the field, there are formal ways of expressing how research is maturing. There are things like the technology readiness levels, which are kind of seen originally came from NASA, but is used in a lot of different research contexts now. This idea, these 9 stages from the early concept to the market or to the application, and even there are these notions of these gaps. There's kind of something, it's called the valley of death sometimes, this kind of area between what is traditionally academia and traditionally kind of industry or practice, but even then it's still much more complicated. There are networks, knowledge is flowing in both directions. This idea that people are producing knowledge and they're not really using it, or the people that are applying this work aren't producing any of that knowledge. It's not really the reality that we live in. There are different kinds of research. There is a kind of like basic ground research, doing things for the sake of understanding the world. And there are kind of clinical trials, tests and experiments. And then there's more the applied research. And then there are the different fields that kind of focus on these in different ways, have very different disciplines, different procedures and methodologies. And then there are the different channels. Some people are doing things to send off to conferences. That might be a way in which some information comes through, but then there are more training courses, and obviously people sharing different experiences, communicating with their peers in different areas. And also, decisions aren't based on research alone. There are all sorts of political aspects to this. There are kind of specific experiences that people come across. So even in this kind of quite simple sort of simplified diagram, you can see that it's much more that than we might assume when we're just publishing things. So really what I'm trying to say is that there isn't a single boundary to cross. There isn't this threshold, and then all of a sudden we'll be in this environment where knowledge is flowing. When we look at preparing heritage for climate change, knowledge is constantly evolving. It can feed into policy and practice at various different stages. It's much more of a cycle. And of course, information alone doesn't change behavior. Policy and practice, they're much more influenced by kind of relationships. The way in which people receive their information and what they trust is kind of varied, and not necessarily based on trying to look at specific kinds of research. And of course, when research is done, often when it's disseminated, it's disseminating that specific project. It's talking about the results of a particular study rather than a meta study or a kind of a consistent way of looking at findings that can be interpreted by practitioners. So then there's a lot just to do in terms of bringing it from those domains of academia, and then it has to be adapted to the local context if it's going to be useful. So there are many efforts needed for research to reach its destination, and people's kind of ideas and behaviors influenced by their colleagues, but also the organizational culture, which is an important aspect of this. So we wanted to look at this a little bit more closely. So we interviewed practitioners who have responsibilities that affect heritage, and in this particular case, we spoke to planners, and this was largely because every municipality has one. They're all involved in climate change, and they a lot of what they're doing is affected by heritage, but also other aspects as well. And they kind of at an interesting point is where kind of information and knowledge meets implementation. So the kinds of decisions which were very important for us. So we had a range of municipalities, and this was to account for variations in kind of location. So we had different regions, but also the size of the municipalities, which can vary a lot. And some of them had heritage offices, but some municipalities didn't. So we wanted something which was kind of across the board, so we could kind of compare them in different ways. So all of the folks that we spoke to, they had graduate backgrounds, some postgraduate, but there were different disciplines, so that kind of varied in different ways. So we wanted to capture the responsibilities and the ways in which people worked. So we had 11 interviews for different areas, but we kind of cross-referenced this with other studies and reports to ensure that the things we were finding were kind of connected to what else was going on there, and that we could kind of ensure that it was robust in that way. So I'm just going to talk to you about some of the findings that we don't. This is Thursday work, by the way. I'm not sure if you. But I'll just take you through some of the findings, and then one of them was just the kind of the classic problems that you see in work on translational research. Things like no one has time to read journals. This is something that perhaps you feel yourself, but it's also one of these things where people didn't necessarily think that was part of their job unless that was specifically so it was something that people had to take on in their own time and was connected to their own interests and how things worked, but it a lot of the people that we spoke to were very, very busy, and that was actually interesting for us to try and get access to these people. But also the way they had access to information, they didn't necessarily have a huge amount of access all the time. And because there's so much, a lot of the things that we were kind of hearing was just where to start. Whereas a lot of people said they were quite overwhelmed by the huge amounts of information that were out there, and where to begin. So then it was often kind of connecting to friends, sometimes going and just Google searches just to try and get a sense of what was going. And these issues, these kind of scattered information, this lack of time, sometimes that set limits on curiosity. So people kind of tended to look at what was around them in their regional plans to kind of connect there. Another kind of aspect of this was this kind of what we call self-sufficiency. And this was kind of connected to regional reform to some extent, that now municipalities had to be responsible for their own work. They have to cover all of the bases themselves, and things have to operate and connect with other things going on in that region. So there was a kind of a structural aspect to this. Often work needed to connect with other municipal documents, regional plans. So a lot of sources were taken from those higher level documents and then applied. So it's actually quite difficult for new information to be applied. It was quite difficult for information to be evaluated and checked in certain ways. But there were also kind of embedded issues of this. Building owners often had to pay for geological surveys and related risks. So people who own historic buildings, those surveys, they would have the same information that their neighbors would have, but there was no incentive to share it. There was no kind of way in which that information from the individual level could be raised higher in a systematic way. So there were kind of great initiatives going on in municipalities, but broader reports tended to be adapted to smaller areas. But this was quite difficult to scale. Another thing that was quite difficult to scale were the networks. Often existed, but they weren't formal. So collaboration with heritage offices might be based on how well people got on, or how kind of willing the heritage office or the planning office were to kind of connect in different ways. So there's often good communication within municipalities, hard to scale at that wider level. And also one of these things was that what is not said in these discussions is often as important as what is said. And one of the things that we didn't really see was a consistent place for knowledge mediation. No one really recognized explicit pathways for research to make its way into practice. There were few recognized mediators or ways in which information was filtered to them. And that was something which was a large part of what we were trying to see, that kind of that meeting ground, how that network was kind of paved. So part of that was, and what I mean by knowledge mediation is that kind of that meeting of knowledge production and the use of knowledge, and how that is maintained. So kind of looking at this well-known model from the medical field, a lot of what we see as mediation, like synthesis and generating tools, these are things which are really part of knowledge production. This is the kind of the tip of what academia might be doing. So even kind of when we think about meta studies and reviews, kind of decision-making tools, this is at the beginning of a lot of how people are kind of understanding these things. So again, gaining insight from the community of practitioners who are tasked with applying this knowledge, when they don't see that clear path, then we have to start to think about what are these issues. There are some fundamental features identified in translational work, kind of a few of them listed here, which really chime with our interviews, things that can benefit from support from all levels, because it's not really the responsibility of any one actor, but these deeper connections and these deeper points of mediation are required from all parties to kind of develop this ecosystem that allows a more kind of dynamic flow of knowledge and give us the preparation for climate change which is needed. So thanks very much for your time and for listening, and yeah, I'll be at the end for any questions. Awesome.